This wedding photograph from 1903 looks perfectly ordinary at first glance. A young bride in white, her proud husband beside her, frozen in a moment of joy. For over a century, it sat in an attic, just another family heirloom gathering dust. But when digital restoration revealed what the bride's hand was actually holding, everything changed. What seemed like an innocent gesture of love became the key to understanding a series of disappearances that haunted a small Pennsylvania town for decades. If you enjoy mysteries like this, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And before we dive in, I'm also working on my other channel where I explore even more fascinating historical enigmas, so check that out too. Now, let's uncover what this photograph has been hiding for over 120 years. Sarah Mitchell never expected to find anything unusual when she volunteered to digitize old photographs for the Historical Society of Bellefonte, Pennsylvania in March 2019. The small town, nestled in the Allegheny Mountains, had a modest collection of family portraits, town records, and forgotten memorabilia dating back to the mid-1800s. Most of the work was tedious, scanning faded images of stern-faced farmers and Victorian-era children who never smiled for the camera. The wedding photograph arrived in a deteriorating leather album donated by the estate of Eleanor Whitmore, who had passed away at 97 without any living relatives. The album contained dozens of photos, but this one stood out immediately. Unlike most wedding portraits from that era, where couples looked stiff and uncomfortable, this bride was smiling. Her name, according to a notation on the back, was Catherine Hartley, and she had married Thomas Brennan on October 14, 1903. Sarah set up the photograph on her workstation, adjusting the lighting and camera angle. The image was remarkably well preserved. Catherine wore a simple white dress with lace sleeves, her dark hair pinned up elegantly. Thomas stood beside her in a dark suit, one hand resting on her shoulder while she held his other hand at her waist. They looked genuinely happy, which was rare for photographs of that period when exposure times meant subjects had to remain perfectly still for several seconds. As Sarah increased the resolution and began adjusting the contrast to bring out faded details, something caught her eye. Catherine's left hand, which appeared to be simply resting against Thomas's, seemed to be gripping something. At normal magnification, it looked like nothing, perhaps a fold in her dress or a shadow. But as Sarah zoomed in, her breath caught in her throat. Catherine's fingers were wrapped around what appeared to be a small object, deliberately concealed between their joined hands. The more Sarah enhanced the image, the clearer it became. It was too regular to be fabric, too purposeful to be accidental. The shape suggested something rectangular, possibly made of metal, with what might have been engravings or markings on its surface. Sarah immediately thought of the curator, Dr. James Harrington, who had worked at the Historical Society for 30 years. She printed the enhanced image and found him in his cluttered office, surrounded by stacks of local history books and archived newspapers. "Jim, you need to see this," she said, spreading the photograph on his desk. Dr. Harrington examined the image through his reading glasses, his expression shifting from mild interest to intense focus. He reached for a magnifying glass, studying the enhanced detail of Catherine's hand. "How did we miss this?" he murmured. "This photograph has been in our collection for years." "It's impossible to see without digital enhancement," Sarah explained. "The original is too dark, and the positioning hides it perfectly. But look at her fingers. She's definitely holding something. And look at her expression. When you know what you're looking for, that smile seems different, almost defiant." Dr. Harrington sat back in his chair, removing his glasses to clean them, a habit Sarah recognized as his thinking gesture. "The Hartley family," he said slowly. "I've come across that name in our archives. There were some unusual circumstances surrounding them in the early 1900s. Let me pull some files. If you're enjoying this mystery so far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me bring you more content like this." Over the next hour, Dr. Harrington retrieved several boxes of documents from the archive room. The story of Catherine Hartley began to take shape, and it was far more complex than a simple wedding photograph suggested. Catherine had been the youngest daughter of William Hartley, a wealthy industrialist who owned several coal mines in central Pennsylvania. The Hartley family lived in a mansion on the outskirts of Bellefonte, and William was known as a shrewd businessman who had built his fortune during the mining boom of the 1880s and 1890s. But he was also known for something else, an obsessive interest in collecting rare and unusual objects. According to newspaper clippings from the Bellefonte Republican, William Hartley had traveled extensively throughout Europe and Asia, acquiring artifacts, rare books, and curiosities. His collection was legendary among the town's elite, though few people had actually seen it. William was secretive about his acquisitions, storing them in a locked wing of his mansion that only he could access. Catherine was 22 years old when she married Thomas Brennan, a schoolteacher from a modest family. The marriage was considered scandalous by Bellefonte's social standards, a Hartley marrying so far beneath her station. According to Society page announcements, William Hartley had initially refused to attend the wedding, though he eventually appeared, looking, as one gossip column noted, grim as a funeral mourner. The wedding took place at the Hartley mansion, a small ceremony with fewer than 20 guests. The photograph Sarah had been restoring was one of only 3 known to exist from that day. But what happened after the wedding was even more intriguing. Less than 6 months after Catherine and Thomas married, William Hartley disappeared. The circumstances were bizarre. According to police reports from April 1904, William had been seen entering his study on the evening of April 3rd. The household staff heard him moving about, and his valet reported bringing him dinner at 8 o'clock. But the next morning, the study was empty. The door was still locked from the inside, the windows were secured, and William Hartley was gone. The police investigation turned up nothing. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence of foul play, and no indication of where William might have gone. His business affairs were in order, and he had left no note. Most mysteriously, the locked wing of the mansion where he kept his collection was found completely empty. Every artifact, every book, every curious object had vanished along with him. Sarah stared at the documents spread across Dr. Harrington's desk. "And Catherine?" she asked. Dr. Harrington pulled out a death certificate dated September 1904. She died 5 months after her father disappeared. The official cause was listed as influenza, but he tapped another newspaper clipping. This obituary mentions she had been in declining health since spring and had become increasingly withdrawn. Thomas Brennan left Bellefonte shortly after her death and never returned. Sarah looked back at the enhanced photograph, at Catherine's hidden hand and that enigmatic smile. "So what was she holding?" "That," Dr. Harrington said quietly, "is exactly what we need to find out." Dr. Harrington's fascination with the photograph became an obsession over the following weeks. He contacted colleagues at universities, showed the enhanced image to experts in Victorian-era photography, and dove deep into the Hartley family archives. Sarah found herself drawn into the mystery as well, spending her evenings after work helping to piece together the puzzle. The Historical Society's basement archives contained more material on the Hartley family than either of them had realized. There were business ledgers, personal correspondence, and even a partial inventory of William Hartley's collection, compiled by an insurance assessor in 1902. The list was extraordinary. Egyptian amulets, medieval manuscripts, Indonesian ritual masks, Tibetan prayer wheels, and dozens of other items from cultures around the world. But one entry stood out. "Listen to this," Sarah said, reading from the insurance document. Item 847, small brass reliquary box, origin unknown, acquired Constantinople 1899, engraved with symbols of uncertain meaning, claimed by seller to have protective properties. Dimensions, approximately 2 inches by 3 inches. Dr. Harrington looked up sharply. The size matches what Catherine is holding in the photograph. Do you see any other description? Sarah scanned the document. There's a note here in the margin written in different handwriting. It says, WH advises this item should not be catalogued for public record. Remove from inventory list. Someone, probably William himself, didn't want that box documented, Dr. Harrington mused. Why would a collector who documented everything else so carefully want to hide one specific item? They found more clues in William's personal correspondence. In the letter to a colleague dated May 1899, shortly after his trip to Constantinople, William wrote, I have acquired something truly remarkable, though I hesitate to describe its nature in writing. The man who sold it to me warned that it carries a terrible burden, but also offers protection from that same burden. A paradox, certainly, but I find myself compelled to possess it nonetheless. Another letter from December 1902 was more disturbing. Written to a professor of archaeology at the University of Pennsylvania, William asked, have you encountered in your studies any references to objects that bind rather than contain? I find myself troubled by a recent acquisition and seek counsel, though I cannot in good conscience relinquish it. The professor's response, which they found filed with the letter, was cautious. Your description is too vague for me to provide specific guidance. However, many ancient cultures believed certain objects could serve as vessels for obligations or debts. If you are concerned about an artifact's provenance or potential dangers, I strongly recommend donating it to a reputable museum where scholars can properly study and secure it. William never took that advice. Instead, the correspondence showed he became increasingly isolated, spending more time in his private collection room and less time managing his business interests. His letters to colleagues grew fewer and more cryptic. By early 1903, the year of Catherine's wedding, there were almost no personal letters at all, only business transactions and terse notes. Leave your comment about what you think is happening in this story so far. Sarah discovered something else in the archives, a diary belonging to Catherine's older sister Margaret, who had married a banker from Philadelphia in 1900. Margaret visited Bellefonte infrequently, but her diary entries from late 1903 and early 1904 painted a troubling picture of life in the Hartley mansion. October 20th, 1903, 6 days after Catherine's wedding. Visited father today and found him in a terrible state. He barely acknowledged my presence, muttering about obligations and protecting what matters. Catherine has married that schoolteacher against his wishes, and father believes she has done something unforgivable, though he won't say what. He looks so old suddenly, so worn. I am worried for him. December 15th, 1903. Catherine came to Philadelphia for the day. She seems different, harder somehow. When I asked about married life, she only said, I've made certain arrangements to protect what's mine. I don't understand what she means. She wouldn't stay for dinner, claiming Thomas expected her home before dark. March 8th, 1904, 5 days after William's disappearance. The police have been questioning everyone about father's disappearance. They searched the entire mansion but found nothing. Catherine was composed throughout the interrogation, too composed, I thought. When I asked her privately if she knew anything, she looked at me with such intensity and said, he's where he chose to be. He made a bargain, and now it's concluded. What bargain? What does she mean? Dr. Harrington arranged for a metallurgist to examine the photograph using advanced imaging software. By analyzing the light reflection patterns and shadows, they could extrapolate more details about the object Catherine held. The metallurgist's report confirmed it was likely brass or bronze, with intricate engravings on its surface. The patterns suggested symbols rather than decorative elements, possibly letters from an alphabet the metallurgist couldn't identify. Whatever this is, the metallurgist said, it wasn't made casually. This level of detail requires either skilled craftsmanship or religious significance, probably both. Sarah and Dr. Harrington decided to investigate further into the physical locations connected to the story. The Hartley mansion still stood on the outskirts of Bellefonte, though it had changed hands several times and was now divided into apartments. They contacted the current owner, Mrs. Eleanor Voss, an elderly woman who had lived there since 1978. Mrs. Voss welcomed them into what had once been the mansion's grand entrance hall, now her personal living room. "I've always known this house had history," she said, pouring tea. "Strange things happen here sometimes. Doors that won't stay closed, cold spots in certain rooms. My tenants complain occasionally, but nothing serious. We're particularly interested in William Hartley's study," Dr. Harrington explained. "Would it be possible to see that room?" Mrs. Voss's expression darkened. "That room was sealed up long before I bought the place. There's a wall there now, has been since at least the 1950s according to the previous owner. But," she hesitated, "about 10 years ago, I had a plumber working on pipes in the basement. He had to break through a section of wall, and he found something odd. A small room, completely bricked up, no door. It was empty except for scratch marks on the walls, deep ones, like someone had been trying to claw their way out." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Where exactly was this room?" "Directly beneath where the study used to be," Mrs. Voss said quietly. "The plumber sealed it back up. He said he didn't want to work in that part of the basement anymore, said it felt wrong." The discovery of the sealed room beneath William Hartley's study opened new lines of investigation. Dr. Harrington obtained permission from Mrs. Voss to conduct a more thorough examination of the mansion's basement, bringing in a structural engineer to map the building's original layout. What they found suggested the mansion had been significantly altered over the years, with several rooms sealed off or repurposed. But it was Sarah who made the next crucial discovery, and it came from an unexpected source. While researching Catherine Hartley in the local newspaper archives, she found a series of articles from September 1904 that hadn't been connected to the Hartley case before. The headlines told a disturbing story. "Second disappearance mystifies Belafonte authorities," and "Local businessman vanishes without trace." Between April and September 1904, the months between William Hartley's disappearance and Catherine's death, 3 other men had vanished from Belafonte under mysterious circumstances. The first was Robert Thorne, a lawyer who handled some of William Hartley's business affairs. He disappeared on May 12, 1904. His office showed no signs of disturbance, and like William, he simply failed to appear one morning. His family reported he'd seemed anxious in the weeks before, mentioning an obligation he needed to fulfill. The second was Henry Morrison, a banker with no obvious connection to the Hartley family. He vanished on July 3, 1904. His wife told police he'd been having nightmares and had become obsessed with finding a way out of an arrangement he'd made years before. The third was Dr. Samuel Pierce, a physician who had treated the Hartley family. He disappeared on August 15, 1904. His medical bag was found in his carriage, but Dr. Pierce himself was gone. A patient who had seen him the day before his disappearance later told authorities that the doctor seemed terrified of something he wouldn't name. Sarah spread the newspaper clippings across Dr. Harrington's desk. 4 men, all disappeared within a 5-month period. William Hartley, then 3 others. And look at this. She pointed to a Society Page article from 1902. All 4 of them attended the same dinner party at the Hartley mansion in November 1902. The article specifically mentions it was a small gathering to view William's newly acquired pieces from his Constantinople trip. Dr. Harrington's face went pale. The brass box. They all saw it. Maybe more than saw it, Sarah said. What if they all touched it? What if whatever William warned about in his letters affected all of them? They dug deeper into the backgrounds of the 4 men. Robert Thorne's widow had donated his personal papers to the Historical Society in 1935. Among them was a diary entry from November 1902, the night of the dinner party at the Hartley mansion. Thorne wrote, "An extraordinary evening at Hartley's. He showed us his latest acquisition, a small brass box covered in strange symbols. William claimed it was a repository for debts, that in the old world people would seal promises and obligations inside such boxes. He let each of us hold it and said, with an odd smile, that now we shared in its protection. Morrison joked that it felt warm to the touch. Pierce said it made him uncomfortable. I felt nothing unusual, but William's manner disturbed me. He seems to believe this object has real power. If you're enjoying this investigation, hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps me continue bringing you these fascinating mysteries. The connection was undeniable now. 4 men who had handled the brass box all disappeared within months of each other. But what about Catherine? How did she fit into the pattern? Sarah found the answer in Margaret's diary, in an entry she had initially overlooked because it predated the wedding by several weeks. September 1903. Catherine and father had a terrible argument today. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard her shout, "You've condemned yourself with your obsessions, but I won't let you take us all down with you." Father's response was too quiet to make out, but Catherine left his study in tears. Later, she told me cryptically that she was going to make certain arrangements, and that her marriage to Thomas was part of breaking free from father's mistakes. The wedding photograph took on new meaning. Catherine wasn't just holding the brass box in the image, she was taking it, the hidden grip, the defiant smile, even the timing of the photograph taken on her wedding day when she was leaving her father's house forever. She had stolen the box. Dr. Harrington pieced together a theory. William acquired the box in 1899 and somehow activated whatever properties it possessed. Perhaps the act of showing it to the others at the dinner party in 1902 bound them all to it somehow. An obligation or debt, as his letters suggested. By 1903, William realized he'd made a terrible mistake, but it was too late. Catherine figured out that the box itself was the key, not just to the curse or obligation, but to controlling it. So she took it on her wedding day. But what did she do with it? Sarah asked. The answer came from the most unlikely source, Thomas Brennan's teaching records. After leaving Bellefonte in 1904, Thomas had eventually settled in upstate New York and continued teaching until his retirement in 1937. He had rarely spoken about his first marriage, but in 1936 he gave an interview to a local newspaper about his 50 years in education. The reporter asked about his early life, and Thomas mentioned briefly that his first wife had died tragically young. Then he said something strange. Catherine was braver than anyone knew. She did what she thought was necessary to protect others, even though it cost her everything. She once told me that some obligations can't be broken, only transferred or contained. I didn't understand what she meant then, and I'm not certain I understand now, but I know she sacrificed herself for reasons she believed were righteous. Sarah highlighted the quote, "transferred or contained." What if the box didn't break the obligation? It just moved it. From the 4 men to herself, Dr. Harrington said slowly. That's why they disappeared after she took the box. The obligation transferred to Catherine, and she died 5 months later, Sarah whispered. Whatever killed those men, whatever that box represented, it killed her too. But she chose it. She took the burden knowingly. With this understanding, Sarah and Dr. Harrington focused their investigation on what happened to the brass box after Catherine's death. If their theory was correct, the object still existed somewhere, and it might still carry whatever dark obligation had claimed 5 lives. Thomas Brennan's descendants proved difficult to trace. He had remarried in 1910 and had 3 children with his second wife, but family records showed the line had dwindled. Sarah eventually located a great-granddaughter, Patricia Brennan Cole, living in Vermont. After several phone calls, Patricia agreed to meet them. Patricia, a woman in her 60s, welcomed them into her home with cautious curiosity. "My great-grandfather rarely talked about his first wife," she explained. "It was treated as a sad chapter we didn't discuss. But after he died in 1941, my grandmother found some things among his possessions that she kept locked away. She led them to her attic and retrieved a small wooden chest. This was passed down with instructions that it should never be opened carelessly. My grandmother gave it to my mother with the same warning, and my mother gave it to me. I've never understood why. It's just some old papers and photographs. Inside the chest were letters, documents, and 3 photographs from Thomas and Catherine's brief marriage. But beneath these items, wrapped in oilcloth, was something else. A small brass box, approximately 2 inches by 3 inches, covered in intricate engravings. Sarah and Dr. Harrington stared at it in stunned silence. They had found it. "May we examine this?" Dr. Harrington asked carefully, not touching it. Patricia nodded, looking uneasy. My mother always said there was something wrong about that box. She claimed it felt warm sometimes, even when it had been sitting in a cold attic. I've touched it a few times over the years. It does feel strange, but I assumed that was just psychological suggestion. Sarah photographed the box from every angle, noting the symbols that covered its surface. They appeared to be a mixture of writing systems. Some resembled ancient Greek, others looked vaguely Aramaic or Coptic, and some were completely unidentifiable. Along the edges were what appeared to be names, engraved in tiny script. Dr. Harrington borrowed a magnifying glass and examined the names closely. "These are English names," he said, his voice tight. "William Hartley, Robert Thorne, Henry Morrison, Samuel Pierce, and..." He paused, pointing to a 5th name, "Catherine Hartley Brennan. Their names are on it," Patricia whispered. "Why?" "We don't know," Sarah admitted, "but we believe this object was connected to their deaths somehow." Among Thomas's letters was one he had apparently written but never sent, dated October 1904, a month after Catherine's death. It was addressed to his brother. The letter read, "I am leaving Belafonte and can never return. Catherine made me promise to keep the box safe, to ensure it never returns to that house or that town. She told me that as long as someone of her bloodline maintained custody of it, the obligation would remain contained." I don't fully understand what she meant, but I witnessed enough in our brief marriage to know she was telling the truth. On the night she died, Catherine was lucid despite her suffering. She held my hand and said, "The burden is mine now, and it will follow my line unless I end it here. But I can't. The box must be kept, must be protected, because if it's lost or destroyed, the obligation reverts to its origin point, and others will pay the price." I asked her what obligation, what price, but she only smiled sadly and said some questions are better left unanswered. She made me swear to pass the box to our descendants with the same instructions she gave me. Keep it safe, keep it in the family, never return it to Belafonte, and never try to open it or destroy it. I have honored that promise, though it haunts me. Sometimes late at night I think I can hear something moving inside it, though that's impossible. It has no seam, no opening, no way in or out. Leave your thoughts in the comments. What do you think is really inside this box? Patricia looked shaken. Are you telling me I've been keeping something dangerous in my attic? We don't know, Dr. Harrington said honestly, but we'd like to study it if you'll allow us. With your permission, we could use non-invasive imaging techniques to see inside it without opening it. Patricia agreed, and 3 weeks later, they had the results from a CT scan performed at a university lab. The imaging revealed that the box was indeed hollow and something small was inside it, but the density readings were anomalous. The object appeared to be solid metal, possibly gold or silver, but it registered temperature variations that shouldn't be possible in an inert material. More disturbing were the electromagnetic readings. The box produced a faint but measurable field, pulsing at irregular intervals. The technician who performed the scan noted that the pattern almost resembled a heartbeat, though that was scientifically impossible. Sarah and Dr. Harrington compiled their findings into a report for the Historical Society, but they both knew the investigation had reached an impasse. They had found the box, traced its history, and documented its connection to 5 deaths, but they couldn't answer the fundamental questions. What was the obligation? What power did the box actually possess? And why had Catherine believed that keeping it in her bloodline would protect others? 3 months after finding the box, Sarah received a call from Patricia. The older woman sounded frightened. "I need to tell you something. Last night, I dreamed about a woman in an old-fashioned wedding dress. She was standing in my bedroom, looking at me with such intensity. She didn't speak, but I knew, somehow I just knew. She was telling me to keep the box safe. When I woke up, the box was on my nightstand. I know I left it in the attic. I haven't moved it." Sarah drove to Vermont the next day. She found Patricia pale but resolute. "My great-grandfather kept his promise," Patricia said. "My grandmother kept hers. My mother kept hers. Now it's my responsibility. I understand that now, but I need to know, are my children in danger? My grandchildren?" Sarah couldn't answer that question. The truth was that nobody knew what would happen if Patricia broke the chain, if she destroyed the box or gave it away, or simply abandoned it. The only evidence they had suggested that Catherine had believed containment was crucial, that the box served some protective function even as it carried its burden. "I'll keep it," Patricia finally decided. "Whatever it means, whatever it costs, I'll honor what Catherine started. But I need you to document everything. If something happens to me, someone needs to know the truth." 2 years after discovering the wedding photograph, Sarah Mitchell stood in the Historical Society's new exhibition on the Hartley family. The wedding portrait hung on the wall, prominently displayed with an explanatory plaque that carefully described the mystery without making supernatural claims. An unusual object visible in enhanced imagery has led to renewed interest in the Hartley family and the circumstances surrounding several disappearances in 1904, the plaque read. The exhibition had drawn considerable attention. Historians, paranormal enthusiasts, and curious locals came to see the photograph and read about the 5 people whose names were engraved on the mysterious brass box. But the box itself was not part of the display. Patricia had declined to loan it, and Sarah supported that decision completely. Dr. Harrington joined Sarah in front of the photograph. "Still fascinating after all this time," he said. "Still mysterious. Still unanswered," Sarah added. They had continued researching in the intervening years, looking for similar cases or historical references to objects like the brass box. They found tantalizing hints, stories of debt boxes in medieval European folklore, references in Ottoman texts to vessels that could bind oaths and souls, Coptic Christian traditions about reliquaries that contained not saints' remains but spiritual obligations. But none of these sources provided definitive answers. Every lead dissolved into legend. Every promising reference turned out to be metaphorical or misunderstood. The brass box remained an enigma, its true nature and purpose locked behind the barrier of Catherine Hartley's silent sacrifice. What they did establish with reasonable certainty was a timeline of its creation. Metallurgical analysis suggested the box dated to the 6th or 7th century CE, originating somewhere in the eastern Mediterranean, possibly Egypt, possibly Syria, possibly Constantinople itself. The symbols on its surface were a hybrid writing system, borrowing from Greek, Coptic, and earlier Semitic alphabets. One scholar suggested they might be an artificial script created specifically for ritual purposes, designed to be meaningful only to initiates of a particular religious tradition. "A tradition that's now lost," Dr. Harrington noted. "Whatever knowledge would have explained this object died out centuries ago. But had it? Sarah sometimes wondered if the knowledge wasn't lost, just hidden. William Hartley had obtained the box from someone in Constantinople in 1899. That seller had known enough to warn William about a terrible burden and protection. Somewhere, perhaps, there were people who still understood what the box truly was. She had tried to track down William's sources in Constantinople, but Ottoman records from that period were fragmentary, especially regarding the antiquities trade. The city had been in flux, ancient collections were being dispersed, and many dealers left no records of their transactions. The trail went cold in the archives of a collapsed empire. Patricia remained in contact, providing occasional updates. The box stayed in her attic, undisturbed, except for the moments when she checked on it as part of her promise to Catherine's memory. She reported no more dreams, no more unexplained movements. "It's just there," she said during one call. "Sometimes I forget about it for weeks. Then I remember and I go upstairs to make sure it's still safe. It always is." "Does it still feel warm?" Sarah asked. "Sometimes, usually at night. I've stopped touching it though. It feels too personal. Like I'm intruding on something private." Sarah understood. In her own way, she felt that investigating the box too deeply was a form of trespass. Catherine had made her choice, had taken the burden willingly to protect others. Perhaps the respectful thing was to honor that choice by not demanding complete understanding. But the questions persisted. What had William Hartley done when he first acquired the box? Had he knowingly activated some ancient mechanism, or had he stumbled into a binding he didn't understand? And why had showing it to the others at the dinner party implicated them as well? Was it the act of touching it, or had William performed some ritual, some invocation that spread the obligation to everyone present? The disappearances themselves remained officially unsolved. The Bellefonte Police Department's cold case files still listed William Hartley, Robert Thorne, Henry Morrison, and Samuel Pierce as missing persons. No bodies had ever been found. No evidence of foul play had ever been discovered. They had simply ceased to exist in the normal world, as if they had been erased. Catherine's death was better documented, but no less mysterious. The influenza diagnosis seemed inadequate given the symptoms described by her doctor in his final notes. She had suffered from progressive weakness, fever, and what the doctor called melancholic fixation, an obsession with arranging her affairs and ensuring certain objects were properly secured. In modern medical terms, it might be described as a wasting disease of unknown origin. But Sarah couldn't shake the impression that Catherine had been consumed by whatever the box contained or represented. That she had deliberately taken the burden from 4 men who may not have understood what they were accepting, and that the burden had killed her as surely as any disease. "Do you think she knew she was going to die?" Dr. Harrington asked one evening as they reviewed the files again. "I think she knew it was possible," Sarah said. Her letter to Thomas suggests she understood the risk, but she thought it was worth it. She believed that by taking the obligation herself and establishing the pattern of keeping it in her bloodline, she could protect others. Did it work, though? That's what I wonder. If the obligation truly transferred to her, why did she need to pass the box to Thomas and eventually to Patricia? Why not let it end with her death? Sarah had thought about this many times. Maybe because the obligation isn't just personal. Maybe it's attached to the box itself, and destroying the box would release it rather than end it. Catherine told Thomas that if the box was lost or destroyed, the obligation would revert to its origin point. What if that origin point means it would go back to claiming random victims, the way it might have done in whatever ancient ritual created it in the first place? They would never know for certain. The box remained in Patricia's custody, its secrets intact. The wedding photograph continued to hang in the Historical Society, Catherine's enigmatic smile captured forever in silver emulsion and mystery. Sometimes Sarah thought about Catherine Hartley standing in her wedding dress on October 14, 1903, holding that brass box hidden between her hand and her husband's. A young woman making an impossible choice, taking a burden she barely understood to save people who might never know what she had done for them. There was something both tragic and heroic in that image, something that transcended the need for complete explanation. The story had no ending, not really. Patricia would eventually pass the box to her children or grandchildren with the same warnings and the same promises. The cycle Catherine had begun would continue, an inheritance of protection and burden passed down through generations. The obligation, whatever it truly was, would remain contained, locked away in brass and silence and family duty. The mystery of the 1903 wedding photograph remains unsolved. We may never know exactly what Catherine Hartley was holding, or what obligation she took upon herself that October day. The brass box exists, documented and studied, but never fully understood. 5 people disappeared or died under circumstances that defy conventional explanation, their names forever engraved on an object that should not, by any rational measure, have the properties it appears to possess. But perhaps some mysteries aren't meant to be solved completely. Perhaps Catherine's sacrifice demands that we respect the boundaries she established, that we honor her choice by not pushing too far into truths that might be dangerous to uncover. If you enjoyed this investigation into one of history's most intriguing mysteries, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your theories about what really happened to the Hartley family and what the brass box might contain. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss future stories. There are more mysteries out there waiting to be explored, more photographs hiding secrets, more stories that blur the line between history and the unexplainable. What do you think? Was Catherine protecting her family from a supernatural curse? Or is there a rational explanation we haven't found yet? Let me know in the comments.